At 11:32 on the morning of December 20th, 1943, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown tightened his grip on the control yoke of his B-17 as the skies over Bremen exploded around him. Black flak bursts bloomed like poisonous flowers, more than 200 guns firing in perfect coordination at the incoming formation. Brown was 21 years old. He had never flown a combat mission before. This was his first. Below him lay the Focke-Wulf fighter factory, one of the most heavily defended targets in Germany. Intelligence officers had warned the crews about fighters, but no one had told Brown that his bomber had been placed in the most dangerous position in the formation, the edge slot the veterans called Purple Heart Corner, where new crews were sent and where German pilots always attacked first. His aircraft, Ye Olde Pub, carried 10 men and 6,000 pounds of bombs. Before they could even reach the target, a cannon shell detonated in front of the cockpit. The nose shattered. Freezing air blasted inside, 60 below zero, screaming through the fuselage at hurricane speed. One engine died instantly. Another began overspeeding, threatening to tear itself apart. The bomber slowed, the formation pulled ahead, and within seconds the newest crew in the group was left completely alone. The German fighters saw them immediately. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs dropped out of the sun and swarmed the crippled bomber. Cannon fire ripped through aluminum skin and flesh alike. The oxygen system burst. Hydraulics sprayed away. Electrical power failed. The tail was torn open, and Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode was killed in his turret without ever knowing what hit him. Men bled in every compartment. Brown felt a fragment tear into his shoulder. The cold froze the guns until only 3 still worked. Then the oxygen ran out. At 27,000 feet, the brain cannot survive without air. Brown's vision narrowed to a tunnel. His hands went numb. His co-pilot slumped unconscious beside him. The last thought he had before the darkness closed in was that his crew was about to die on their very first mission. The B-17 fell. It dropped out of the sky in an uncontrolled dive, airspeed screaming past 300 miles an hour, the wings shuddering as if they might rip away at any second. Somehow, at barely 1,000 feet above the ground, consciousness returned. Thicker air filled Brown's lungs. With what strength he had left, he hauled back on the yoke and leveled out just above the treetops. Blood covered the cockpit. Wounded men lay everywhere. One crewman was dead. And ahead of them lay a German fighter airfield. On that field, a Luftwaffe ace named Franz Stigler was refueling his Messerschmitt. He had already destroyed 2 bombers that morning. One more would earn him the Knight's Cross. He looked up and saw the battered American bomber limping low across the field and immediately took off in pursuit. Minutes later he slid in behind Ye Olde Pub, his gun sight centered on the helpless tail. One squeeze of the trigger would end it. But as he closed in, he saw what no target drone could ever show him. The tail gunner was dead, frozen blood hanging in crimson icicles. Through the torn fuselage, he saw wounded men tending to one another, faces pale with shock and fear, hands shaking as they tried to keep the aircraft in the air. They were not fighting. They were only trying to survive. Stigler remembered the words of his old commander, a man who taught that honor mattered more than medals, that shooting a defenseless man was not combat but murder. He felt the rosary beads in his pocket, thought of his mother who wanted him to be a priest, thought of his brother who had already died in this war. And in that moment, with victory and glory one heartbeat away, Franz Stigler lifted his finger from the trigger. But sparing them was not enough. The bomber was flying deeper into Germany. Someone else would kill them. So Stigler made a decision that could cost him his life. He slid his fighter alongside the American cockpit, close enough for Brown to see his face through shattered glass. He tried to signal surrender, then pointed north toward Sweden. Brown did not understand and kept flying west. So Stigler did the unthinkable. He formed up on the bomber's wing and escorted it. Side by side they crossed farmland and villages, past convoys and flak batteries, daring anyone below to fire. The gamble worked. Coastal guns held their fire, radar operators assumed they were friendly, and together the two aircraft reached the gray edge of the North Sea. There Stigler saluted. Two young men looked at each other through broken glass and frozen air, enemies by uniform, brothers by fate. Then the German pilot turned away and vanished back toward Germany. Charlie Brown still had 250 miles to go. Over freezing water, with 3 engines damaged, no heat, no oxygen, no radio, and men bleeding in the back of the aircraft, he fought the bomber across the sea. For nearly 2 hours he nursed failing engines and prayed they would not stall. One by one the wounded faded in and out of consciousness. The dead man lay where he had fallen. And somehow, against every law of war and physics, the English coast finally rose from the mist. Brown crash-landed at RAF, seething in a storm of sparks and torn metal. 8 men climbed out alive. 1 was carried out dead. Ye Olde Pub would never fly again. At debriefing, Brown told the officers about the German fighter who had spared them. They ordered him never to speak of it again. Franz Stigler told no one either. For 46 years, the secret lived only in their memories. They built lives, raised families, crossed oceans, and wondered in silence whether the man in the other cockpit had survived. Then in 1986, Charlie Brown finally told the story out loud. 4 years later he wrote one last letter to a German veterans newsletter. A reply came from Canada. I was the one. When they met in a hotel lobby in Florida, 2 old men stood staring at each other across half a century of silence. Then they embraced and wept. Photographs were passed, children and grandchildren whose lives existed because a finger had not pulled a trigger. From that day on, they were inseparable. They spoke together, traveled together, celebrated holidays together. Former enemies became brothers. The world learned their story. Crews were finally awarded medals. Honors were given. Books were written. Songs were sung. And when death finally came for one, the other followed only months later, as if neither could stay long in a world without the other. The story they left behind was not about war. It was about mercy, about honor, about the moment, high above the frozen fields of Germany, when one man chose not to kill, and changed generations of lives forever.